I want to thank CODESRIA for this opportunity, for this critical engagement with what I have written and what I have done, and with what I have not written and not done. And I'm going to focus on 5 main issues: gender, tribe, including non-racial apartheid, which Thandika raised, Sheikh Anta Diop, Ifriqiya, and Miser. Okay, these are the 5 issues. As I understand, these are the key issues that have been raised by my interlocutors and from the floor. But first, just a preliminary comment. In the books that have been cited here, and notwithstanding my most recent engagement with higher education and decolonization, I have been focused, my work is focused on 2 major themes. One is the theme of the civic and the customary, and particularly the question of the customary, okay? And the other is the theme of political identity and political violence through genocide in Rwanda, extreme violence in Darfur. Okay, so let me begin with the questions raised regarding gender. IB says, I don't talk of minorities, I don't talk of youth, I don't talk of women. Zen says, gender is key to forced labor, and I don't talk about gender. I agree and I don't agree. Let me tell you where I don't agree, and I hope it becomes clear where I agree. My understanding of citizen and subject, central to it is not forced labor. Central to it is the question of the customary. Central to it is the changed structural role of custom in pre-colonial society, custom as a part of society itself, custom as underlying the capacity of society to solve disputes, local disputes, to maintain order itself, and to reproduce relationships. From that, custom becomes customary law. It becomes part of the state ranged against society, part of the state to discipline society and to reshape relations within society. The reshaping of the customary addressed 2 particular groups, youth and women. Right? The customary law reproduced a patriarchal set of relationships as central to what it claimed was tradition. Right? Now, this was my main argument in Citizen and Subject. Now, maybe I did not succeed in making it as clearly as possible. That's a question of time, and that's a question of learning. But that is my main argument. But I also learned a second thing along the way, which is you cannot be permissive. You cannot claim to be writing about everything. You really have to choose what it is you're writing about, and you have to focus on it, but without being blind to the world at large. So I'm not a historian, but I'm not blind to history. I'm not a gender theorist, but I'm not blind to gender. But at some point, I had an ambition of being a gender theorist. Zen will remember this, because Jen will remember that in the 1980s, right, I can't remember the exact year, CODESRIA wanted to promote a project on gender, and there was a retreat. And in the retreat was Samir Amin, Marie-Angélique Savané, Zen, myself. Right? And for this retreat, I wrote a paper exclusively on gender. Okay? But it was such a narrow view of gender because it looked at gender through the eyes of political economy. And I was slaughtered during that retreat. And I came back so wounded, it took me months to recover. And I decided at the end of it that no, look, you can't do everything. Expertise is not instantaneous, right? It takes half a lifetime or a lifetime to learn things. And I said, okay. So when I moved over to Citizen and Subject, right, gender informed it, but it was not a book about gender. Okay. But there was a second thing that I learned about gender when I was dealing with political violence, genocide in Rwanda, the extreme violence in Darfur, which is that there is something different about gender, and there is something different about youth. Because I was dealing with political violence, I asked myself, could there ever be a genocide of women? Could there ever be a genocide of youth? My answer was no. Any society which follows this project would have spelt its doom immediately, because reproduction would be impossible, right? Gender has to be thought through. It can't be an add-on. That's another conclusion I reached at that point. It cannot be an add-on. And when I was talking of genocide, I was talking of genocide of particular political identities which had been politicized, right? And whose rights and disabilities were reproduced through state law, and which were then targeted as politicized identities. So this is just to explain, yes, I agree. I'm not a gender scholar, but no, I don't agree that I'm blind to gender. Or have been. I mean, it's not I am, but the work we are discussing. Tribalism. So Ivy says, I talk about the success of the post-colonial state in deracializing, but not in detribalizing. But now don't we understand that tribe, ethnicity is universal? And the idea of detribalization has to be questioned. I don't agree. And I want to take in Tandika's question about non-racial apartheid here, because they're linked. When I studied indirect rule, okay, my understanding was indirect rule was that it came out of a crisis of direct rule and the civilizing mission. And the civilizing mission turned on a single difference, race. And the civilizing mission had a huge disadvantage, which is that it reproduced a tiny minority of the civilized and put together against it a huge majority of the uncivilized, okay, who over time gained the self-consciousness that they were the target of this racialism. And the challenge for the colonial power, and this is a challenge posed after the middle of the 19th century, following a series of revolts, the challenge for the colonial power was, how do you fragment this majority? And the solution, indirect rule, was now to create a second layer of discrimination. First layer was race, and the second layer became tribe. By turning tribe into a unit of local government, by turning tribe into an authority in local government, by turning tribe into a justification for a set of what were called customary laws. And key to this law was that anybody who was not descended from an indigenous to that particular local government unit would not have a customary right to land and would not have the right to participate in representation. Right? And my understanding was that there was no part, literally, of the continent where you had everybody belonging to a single ethnic group. This was a continent of migrations. Everywhere there were minorities, ethnic minorities. And immediately, indirect rule set a majority against a minority in every local unit. And when we got independence, the big debate was between the radical nationalists who said this was a colonial project, and the mainstream and conservative nationalists who said, no, this is African tradition. And that has indeed not only survived, it has prospered. It remains a big challenge. When I wrote, actually the book was the same, only the title changed. Okay, Chandika was furious with the title because I said, I think now we can say it over. Okay, over beer. But let me just say one thing. Because my point about South Africa was that they had deracialized the state, but they had not detribalized customary law, right? Which was to detribalize customary law would affect three groups. It would affect non-indigenous groups within non-indigenous tribes within the area. It would affect youth, and it would affect women. These are the three groups that desperately need a detribalization of customary law. Third issue, tribalism. Sheikh Anta Diop. I have great respect for Sheikh Anta Diop coming from my attempt to understand what possible sources can we turn to understand pre-colonial Africa. Because Sheikh Anta Diop diversified our sense of sources beyond the textual archive. He turned our attention to language. He turned our attention to multiple things. But I have a disagreement when it comes to the corpus of Sheikh Anta Diop. I understand Sheikh Anta Diop is looking for an archive of civilization within Africa, the way the Europeans constructed an archive of civilization in ancient Greece. And I think he turned the European project upside down. I think that was a mistake because in my view, and I teach at Miser, I teach a first-year course called Major Debates in the Study of Africa. And it begins with not with Sheikh Anta, with Du Bois. Du Bois, Sheikh Anta, Martin Bernal, those sets of debates. It's interesting that Du Bois comes before Sheikh Anta. Sheikh Anta never acknowledges Du Bois. Bernal comes after Sheikh Anta. Bernal never acknowledges Du Bois or Sheikh Anta. Okay? But Du Bois, to me, was the closest to what I consider to be the way we need to understand civilization. Because civilization, in my view, does not have a single source. Okay? It is pointless to look for the origin of civilization. The origin of civilization is a nationalist pursuit, right? Which will not pay us anything because civilization emerges at the confluence of different traditions, right? It emerges in the Nile Delta where you have a confluence. It emerges at different places through a confluence, whether it's the European Renaissance, whatever it is. So I have a disagreement here. And fine, it's a productive disagreement, but that's why what I've done does not reflect this. Ifriqiya, I just want to say one thing, which is that Ifriqiya is not about, it's about pre-colonial, Mamadou is right, but it's not about Arabic-speaking pre-colonial. No, it's about pre-colonial Africa. But Ifriqiya has begun with two focuses. One is West Africa, North Africa, the Sahara, okay? And the other is East Africa, the Indian Ocean, okay? The first is, parts of it anyway, significantly Arabic speaking. The second, not really. Miser, well, Miser is a work in progress, and any worthy endeavor should be known by the challenges it faces. We've faced a lot of challenges. One of our funders, Carnegie, I recently had a meeting in New York City because I spent 4 months at Columbia and 8 months in Kampala. So I had a meeting with them, and the Carnegie person asked me, she said, you know, Mahmoud, if you had known all the challenges you would face at Miser, would you have taken up the job? So I looked at her and I said, if I had known everything we achieved now, yes, I would have taken up the job. Thank you.